So we are starting this lecture, which is a lecture that we are giving in presence to the students of the Housing and Neighborhood Studio in the Master of Science in Urban Planning and Policy Design at Politecnico di Milano. But we are online because this is a lecture within the general framework of the ReHousing project. As we already mentioned, the ReHousing project is a ReHousIn project. And together with the colleagues, especially from TU Vienna, so Judith Lehner, who is connected, and with the colleagues from the other partner universities, we are sharing some lectures which are based on the 9 study cases of the ReHousing scope. So this is the first one, and will be focused on Milano. And especially, we have decided to focus this lecture together with Marco Peverini and Lorenzo Caresana on a specific issue, which is the issue of affordability, with reference to the work that we are doing in the city of Milano. So it's a specific focus, which is very useful for the students in class, and it's also one of the main contributions we are bringing to the ReHousing project, with a specific focus also on the definitions and contents of affordability in the housing debate. So this is just a very short introduction about the ReHousing project. ReHousing stands for Reducing Housing Inequalities, and we are working on the impacts of environmental and energy policies on housing inequalities in these 9 different countries, looking at different scales. As I said, with Marco and Lorenzo, we will focus on the specific work of OCA. OCA stands for Observatory on Affordable Housing. In Italian is Osservatorio Casa Portabile. And on the case of Milano. OCA is an observatory which is based at Politecnico di Milano and funded by 2 different cooperative groups. One is called Consorzio Cooperative Laboratori, and the other Libera Unione Mutualistica. It's active since 2022. You can easily find also this information on the website. We will mention it at the end. There is an internal board, which is made by us, the 3 of us, and staff from the housing cooperatives. There is a photographer who is involved, is Giovanni Henninen, and a laboratory from our department, which is working on data. It's called MautLab. And we have an international committee, an international scientific committee, with colleagues who somehow revise and comment constantly our work. I already introduced it as a joint initiative. And, sorry, on this, I would add that we are also somehow part of a network of housing observatories across Europe, which have a variety of profiles. Some are based in the public institutions. Some, like OCA, are initiatives which have a collective attitude and aim, but are somehow independent from the local authorities. Why we think that Milano is interesting to discuss about housing affordability? Well, Milano in the recent years became somehow an emblem of urban growth and of housing tension meanwhile. We are referring in the work of OCA to 2015, because 2015 was the year in which the Expo was opened in Milano. So the International Universal Exposition was held in Milano, and somehow 2015 marks a turning point in the dynamics of urban development in the city, in the profiles of the population as well, and in the dynamics of the real estate market, but also of the labor market. So there has been in these years in Milano a constant reference to the increase of real estate values. And what is interesting is to consider that the increase of real estate values has been very open openly referred to as a sign of success. So if the real estate values increase, the city is more and more attractive and in a good shape. This it's also was very much the rhetoric in the media discourse, discussing and presenting more and more Milano as a city of international success. And we have these two quotations which are really emblematic, because in 2009, the city of Milano was defined by the Financial Times as the Cinderella of Europe, like the last city in a row in terms of urban dynamics. And in 2015, the New York Times defined Milano as a place to be. So in a few years, you had this diverse representation of the city. And meanwhile, while definitely Milano became more and more attractive, we have been facing the issue of a housing crisis. And symbolically, so OCA was already active, but symbolically we cannot avoid referring to something which has been very relevant in the city, which was a student from Politecnico di Milano started to protest and setting a tent in front of our universities, just a few meters from where we are, somehow claiming that housing costs are so high in the city that a student who is not based in Milano with his or her family cannot access university. So claiming, asking for political attention on the housing question. And this was a campaign, somehow a movement that started in Milano and was spreading also in other Italian cities. So we look at OCA, at an observatory on housing affordability, as a tool for housing policies. So we have focused on the fact that until recently, there have been no public data nor public debate on housing costs and incomes, somehow as it would be a taboo to discuss about the level of incomes in the city. And this has implied a lack of references for the design and evaluation of housing policies. So it's not that housing has not been built or promoted or supported, but with little reference and verification testing about the affordability of the new housing for people in the city. And this definition of affordability that we have assumed is a very clear and basic one, which is referring to a lot of literature that has also more complex definitions, but we have chosen the more simple, the simplest, which is defining housing affordability as the relation between housing costs and incomes or salaries, when housing costs do not exceed 30% of net income. So if housing costs are more than 30% of your income, then there is an issue of affordability. So it's a very simplified definition, but which is very much shared by the debate, and it's a relevant reference for all of us because you can easily test the affordability of your housing if you measure it in these terms. It's not a new issue. We always use this image of a very renowned march that was done in Milano in the 60s to discuss about housing costs. But there are many reasons why we can say that there is a new form or a more intense situation nowadays in terms of affordability of housing in our cities. So OCA adopts a definition of affordability as a proportion of housing costs within 30% of the net income. And we insist on the fact that affordability is a qualification in relative terms of the housing supply, defined by this relation between price of rents and incomes. So we always insist on the fact that affordable housing is not a label, not a segment of the supply, because more and more there is the discussion on affordable housing. as we say, social housing, public housing, and then somehow pops up the definition of affordable housing. We insist that this would be a limitation and it's controversial, and it's much more relevant to discuss about the affordability of housing. So every time you need also to consider the reference to income and the proportion. Otherwise, it's just an empty label. And now we will continue with Marco and Lorenzo getting into the contents of the work of the observatory and on the different data that we have been collecting and elaborating.
Yeah, hello everybody. Hello, Vienna. So maybe it's good to say that part of the methodology that we developed for the observatory was also driven by a PhD research thesis that was funded by one of the two cooperatives which is funding the observatory, and that I carried out. I had the scholarship for this research, and so the sort of idea behind the observatory and the methodology was a upscaling of that kind of PhD research that was about affordability and the impact of urban policies on affordability. And in particular, since also Rebecca is here, we were inspired by a lecture held by Christine Whitehead, who is a very renowned housing scholar from London, who had a way of explaining the affordability situation of London, which we deemed very comprehensive. So basically collecting a set of data that describe the situation and then combining them to have a sort of analysis of the affordability situation of a city. And this is somehow what we tried to do for Milan, something that was not had not been done in this way. So this was also an attempt to bring something that is quite acknowledged in the English literature, in the Anglosphere, let's say, the literature on housing affordability in Italy, where the debate has never been really focused on the issue of affordability. It was always something related to public housing, to the housing crisis, to social movements, to squatting, but never really, except for some economic newspapers, focused on affordability. So what you see is our attempt. Now I will speak about our research for Milan. Then Lorenzo will speak about what we did for the urban region. And we also tried to merge, in a way, the approach that we have for the observatory with the approach that we are developing for the ReHousIn research, which is focused on housing inequalities. As this is part of the lecture series of the ReHousing project, so we will also try to reflect on how our findings, the findings from the observatory, are translatable to the issue of housing inequalities and the ReHousing project. So, first of all, talking about Milano, what we want to look at, or actually talk to you about, is the conditions of access to housing. So we are talking about Milan. Is one of the three main cities in Italy, with Rome and Napoli. It's not the capital city, as you know, but it's kind of, in a way, the economic capital, sometimes also referred to as the moral capital. In a way, it has been the industrial engine of the country in the developed north, and now is the core of a huge industrialized and very dense urban region, which basically develops all around the Italian north. And it is also a municipality in the administrative system, this one that you see in red, within a province which is called Metropolitan City, and within other provinces. First thing to look at, which is quite important for the ReHousing project as well as for our work in the observatory, is the evolution of tenure in the city and population. What you can see is, if we look at 30-year span, is that actually population has not changed that much. So Milan has actually lived a period of attractiveness, but it was not so much an issue of attracting a lot of population. The big population attraction was actually taking place in the post-World War era, when industrialization was developing. So in the last 30 years, something has happened which was not the same. What you can see, however, is that households, in fact, grew quite significantly in the period. You can see that in 2001, they were less than 600,000 households in Milan registered, and now they are over 720,000. So there was a massive growth that was driven by single-family households, which passed from 30% to over 54% of the households. So something here regarding the housing tension is probably related to this change in the social demographic structure. Something else also, if you look at, okay, there was a growth in the number of houses and dwellings, but also there was a big change in the tenure structure. So as you know, tenure is the way people access and maintain housing. Now you can be owner-occupied, you can be a tenant and rent, you can be a tenant from a private landlord or from a public social landlord, and so on. So what you see is a huge change in 30 years of the tenure structure. Tenants in 1991 represented 44% of households, and now they are 25. People who own their houses passed from 51 to 70%. This is a huge change in line with the change that happened in the whole country, which has also changed the nature of housing problems in the city. Finally, you see how decommodified tenure, so basically public housing and rental cooperatives, which grant very low rents and very stable contract in the rental sector, they passed, in case of public housing, from almost 50% to less than 8%. So here there was also a change. Dimensions of inequality in this sense, like related to tenure, very briefly, what we know, this is taken from the ReHousIn project actually, is that there is a big difference in your economic conditions. Generally, if you are a tenant, you pay a big part of your income on housing, on rent. So usually it's around 35% on average. Then if you are a homeowner, that would be less than 15%. This is a key data that we will try to use to interpret our results in the end. I will say regarding the rental sector that if we look at the rental sector, which is around 25 to or 29% of the total household, depending on the measurement, 1/3 is still in public housing. And in public housing, rents are very, very low and they are related to income. However, almost 2/3, so the vast majority is in the market. So people or households renting from private landlords. And here, the market is key. So what we have to look at is the market trends of rentals. And here, and of rental contracts. Here what you see is a huge transformation that happened in very few years, from 2015 on the conditions of the leases or of tenancies, so rental contracts in Milan, in which we see that long-term contracts, which in the Italian legislation are 4-year renewable 4 years, so 8 years normally, went down from 80% to 64% of the leases registered every year, in favor of temporary contracts, which are less than 3 years and usually are even 1 or 1.5 years, that pass from 70 to 30%. So a change is happening here with precarization of the rental market happening and being more and more an issue. How do rental levels change in this period? Also reflecting this increased change in the leases, because at every change of lease, you can raise the rent. Then what you see basically is 2 lines. The one in red is the weighted average of the contract registered by the agency, the public agency of the revenues, which you see that an average rental levels passed from 11 euro per square meter per month to 16 euro per square meter per month. So an almost 50% increase in around 7 years. Here in yellow, we took the average from a real estate portal, one you might know if you look for a house, immobiliare.it, where you can see that the rate of change was quite similar, but the level is 40% higher. What does it mean? Is that if you have an existing lease, your rental contract is increasing by the time, but is lower because probably you had this house already some years ago. If you now look for a house in the market, your rental level will be much higher. Something similar happens to people who access housing through home ownership, through sale, buying, which is still the majority in a way. And here we observed over 50% increase in housing prices. And it is interesting to see, we resumed this from a previous report, that actually this rate of change interests all districts in the city, but also that a very huge increase was experienced by the district that used to be more affordable because they were more peripheral or semi-peripheral. And especially in some semi-peripheral neighborhoods that were those where some urban regeneration initiatives were the most important, here is where housing prices grew the most. Finally, regarding the conditions of access to housing, it's interesting to look at how the new construction of housing, what happened in the new construction of housing. And here what you can see is the rate of building permits per year by type of actors, of developer. So in gray, you see private developers. In red, you see housing cooperatives, and in yellow, you see public developers. So basically, the municipality or the regional authority. What you can clearly see is that public developers do almost nothing in the 10 years, 2011, 2021. Cooperatives had an important role that, however, passed from being quite important quantitatively in the early 2010s to being much less important in the later period. And what you see is also that private developers increased their role quite substantially in the latest period. So there is something changing also in the realm of housing development in the city. Some insights about what we are doing for rehousing that might be important for the discussion about housing inequalities and about how our work can relate to the dimensions of housing inequalities. And here we are not talking about the work from the Observatory, but with Rebecca and another colleague, also from Vienna, Michael, we have been working on densification policies, and this is an extract from a map that we produced for Milan, where you can see, actually you cannot really see, but what I can tell you is that densification, so basically one of the dimensions we are observing, is allowed in almost every part of the city of Milan by the urban government plan. Because either it is allowed in around transport lines, but also in peripheral areas, with the argument that urban regeneration would bring services and economic opportunities in peripheral locations. So basically, in this panorama of allowing densification almost everywhere, there were, let's say, rules that introduce social goals for driving densification also towards inclusiveness, so basically inclusionary zoning, a requirement of social housing production where you have densification, was quite ineffective. This together with a very timid approach to housing provision from the public that we saw before was almost not there, drove an approach to densification that basically increased land value, inflated land value, and thereby inflated housing prices, and inflated housing prices almost in every part of the city. In this panorama, the main densification hubs that used to be public land have been sold to private developers and that now are developed by privates or very often financialized private developers in a logic of maximization of profit, also because the cost of land was usually quite high. How does greening policies interplay with this panorama that we described? We don't have yet a clear understanding, but what we feel, well, there is evidence that proximity to green in Milan is not so relevant on determining housing prices and prices growth, which is quite surprising for us. But what we see is that green is often accompanying densification and regeneration projects, the ones that we saw before. And often green is used as a form of acceptability and also valorization of real estate initiatives and housing projects. And also as a key point of negotiation with the municipality, with the public actor, instead than housing objective. Now, in a way, there was for some time a substitution of the green agenda from on the topic of housing inclusion. So, in a way, we could say that there was somehow a use of green as a greenwashing of existing profit-making initiatives instead of driving an effect on gentrification. Finally, how does the retrofitting, which is our third focus of analysis, intertwine with this sort of panorama of inequalities that we described? Well, retrofitting was by far probably the most important policies in terms of funding, public funding. There was an estimate around 2 years ago that almost 2 billion euros were invested only in Milan for retrofitting of public money, which is quite a massive investment if you consider that nothing has been spent on public housing. But most funding for retrofitting went to owner-occupiers through the very famous in Italy scheme of the eco bonus or super bonus 110. And also there are data saying that only around half, a little bit more than half of this funding went to multifamily buildings, condominium. So this means that almost half of the funding went to single-family homes or double homes or homes that are not multifamily. So usually those that are actually inhabited by people who have a higher income. Finally, I would say, what is the role of urban policies in the realm of inequalities? At the local level, urban planning and land policies are the key leverages for housing policies because the municipality does not have a sort of way of collecting taxes for example, subsidizing housing. However, in the way that it has been carried out, urban regeneration had a kind of disruptive side effects on the housing prices of many districts in the city and overall. And finally, there has been no new public housing. This is not only for Milan, it's quite common in Europe, and this is a big criticality. The other side of the coin, so on the one side, houses, on the other, people and their economic conditions. So incomes and salaries. This is a dimension that when we started, we struggled introducing because coming from urban planning, talking about salaries is not properly, a core business in a way. But in the debate about around affordability, as we defined it, a relation between costs and economic capacity, then salaries and incomes is a key. So Milan is among the highest municipalities per average per capita income in Italy, with almost 40,000 gross income declared by each taxpayer. So for Italy is quite significant. However, the distribution of income is particularly polarized. As you can see from this data from tax declarations, actually, to make it short, almost 60% of taxpayers declare an income that is below 26,000 euro gross. And almost 1/3 declares an income that is less than 15,000 euro gross per year. Okay, so this makes a big difference when you talk about average and then the composition. How does the job market behave in this sense? So to make it short, this is the distribution of average salaries among the different qualifications in the private sector. So private sector where salaries are usually the highest, and we are talking about employees, so not self-employed, which is usually a very different topic. So we are not talking about employees, so very clear data. Here, what we see is that 40% of workers almost, they fall in the blue-collar qualification, and their average net monthly wage is 1,200 euros. Another almost 50% of workers falling within the white-collar domain have an average net estimated monthly wage of 1,700 euro gross. What does this allow to afford? Let me just go here. So this is the square meters you can afford with this qualification. Blue collars, they can afford 12 square meters in the center, 17 in the semi-center, and 30 square meters in the peripheral neighborhoods. White collars, 16, 23, and 40. So basically, this means that the job, actually, at this moment in time, is not enough to afford a dwelling that is in the market, because 17 square meters is not a dwelling that is marketized, fortunately. It's maybe a room. And this explains also why people are more and more looking for sharing homes. Finally, trends. How has this changed? And this maybe might be even more worrying. From 2015 to 2023, housing prices grew 58%, rents 45%, salaries grew around 15%, and especially blue-collar salaries grew only 9%, so half of the inflation rate. In this sense, we are seeing a rapid intensification of the affordability crisis for workers. So this is driving our key sort of message here. It is not anymore, or it is not nowadays, a city for workers. The gap between incomes and salaries and housing cost widens. Property values are growing at almost 3 times the rate of salaries. So if this continues, what happens in 10 years is a big question mark. A job is not enough to guarantee access to an adequate dwelling, or a dwelling that is even present in the market. So home sharing is the only way for single people to actually access a house at the moment, even if they have a rather good job. Around, as was already mentioned, 40% of employees and 57% of income earners would be completely excluded by the housing market if they rely solely on their job income. So, second conclusion, real estate property, either because you inherited or because someone gave you the money to actually buy a house in advance, a very expensive, very, very expensive house. So we're talking about 300,000 euro, 400,000 euro, or even more. And therefore, parental help are becoming a necessary precondition to even be able to work in the city. This could come with lack of immigration of low-income individuals, so a selective turnover of the city. We are hypothesizing here, we have no data for this. So, and polarization is increasing, and we hypothesize an expulsion process that has been proven by other studies on residential mobility dynamics. Progressive exit of low-income individuals and households from the municipal perimeter to the hinterland, so outside of the city. And this, we have discussed this already in a few publications. One is freely downloadable in Italy, another one is freely downloadable in English, and the one in the middle is a book that you can find in libraries. And we also try to discuss about these topics on more, say, communicative or divulgation initiatives, like the currently ongoing Triennale exhibition in Milan, where we exhibited some graphs, some figures on quite huge 4x4 model of the city of Milan. I give the word to Lorenzo Caresana.
Okay, thank you. So in this second part of the presentation, I'm gonna speak about like maybe the biggest update to our research that was published this year in a second report of research, where we extended the analysis on housing affordability to the Milan's urban region. So we started to think about affordability at the metropolitan level. And this because, I mean, it's part of the discourse, the political discourse, the public discourse of like saying, okay, but if you cannot afford to live in the city of Milan, in the center of Milan, why don't you go in the periphery? If you cannot afford to live in the city, why don't you go outside? I mean, you can pay less. But at which conditions of affordability you can do it actually? Because maybe housing costs are lower, but you have other costs like commuting and even sacrifices, personal sacrifices like the time that you spend in commuting. If it's not like your choice, but if you are expelled. So actually, one of the first steps that we did like in the research was to invite the local authorities to the Politecnico. We organized an event where actually more than 33 mayors of the municipalities outside of Milan came to the Politecnico, to our Aula Magna, to discuss about housing affordability. And this is a very unusual and uncommon event for this kind of people because they usually gather around political colors or administrative bodies. But actually we send out this call to everybody, almost everybody of the municipalities that we actually are analyzing today, and they came. And also mayors of cities very far away from Milan, in other provinces, in other metropolitan cities. So the idea is that also that we couldn't like really concentrate only on the metropolitan city, that is an administrative body, but we wanted to see, I wanted to do an exploration of the condition of housing affordability outside of Milan. So to do so, you will start to see this map on the right, like where you can see actually all the municipalities that participated in that event. We gave like our personal definition of the extended urban region of Milan. So we draw actually a simple square of 60 kilometers around the city that is actually containing more than 300 municipalities, 339. And we started to make maps and analyze the conditions of affordability on this territory. That actually doesn't follow any prior definition, any prior zoning, because we really think that the housing question is not like contained in administrative bodies, nor in functional zonings like the one of commuting, for example. So one of the first actions that we did was to cancel Milan in all this map. So we left Milan in blank because a lot of interest, a lot of research also, academic research has been conducted into the city of Milan and less outside. So in this part of the job, we wanted really to concentrate on what is outside. And so we left Milan in blank. And we concentrated obviously on two infrastructures like the housing infrastructure, so the residential fabric, but also another infrastructures like the mobility one that you will see how we developed also the analysis on that. So we started to map like different indicators. You can find a lot of maps also in the report if you want to dig into it. A lot of social demographic data, but now, I mean, from time concerns, we wanted to concentrate on some. This one is, for example, the map of commuting. You can see that, I mean, the darker red are the ones who with the higher dependence on the job markets of Milan, because you have more than maybe, in some cases, more than 50% of the employed resident in one municipality come to Milan to work. So you see that there is actually a strong dependence of this territory. You see also that the geography is more like depending on the geographical distance than on the real infrastructure. And this because still we have a high dependence on cars in this metropolitan area. And then we started to map the ingredients of affordability. So for sure, the average incomes that actually are very much defined by which kind of housing supply have been developed in those areas. Because imagine that, I mean, this area grow a lot also in recent times. And you find, for example, municipalities like Basilio or Cusago that are one of the richest from the point of view of average income in Italy, next to municipalities with the lowest average income in Lombardy. So, for example, I mean, you have Rozzano in the south that has the highest percentage of public housing in Italy, maybe also in Europe, someone says, of really in public hands. You have almost 40% of the housing stock that is in public hands there. And this influences a lot, I mean, also the incomes that are present into these territories. So you have a great heterogeneity here. Then we also map the average sale prices, obviously, and you can try to, I mean, you get like the Milano-centric geography here. So the sale prices are higher if you are next to Milan. All the first belt are municipalities where the sale prices are really high, almost like Milan in some cases. And then you can start to see also the influence of some infrastructures. But you see it better here, for example, with the rents. Because here you can see, for example, the green metro line that is actually colored by this map. And so you see that also rent really follows also this accessibility to Milan trend. So the first exercise that we did, the first indicator that we produced, that we invented a little bit, like in this case, was to try to quantify the internal affordability of these municipalities, because now we're speaking a lot about, I don't know, moving to outside Milan, but which are the conditions of affordability in these areas? So we did a simple exercise here. If I can dispose of the municipal average net income, and I want to spend 30% of this income on housing costs, then which kind of housing I can access? So this is actually the situation that is really, again, you can see this geography that is almost Milano-centric, but you have also this area to the northeast that is like another province that is Monza Brianza, that is also, I mean, very rich province in Italy. And you can see that in all this area and also in the major like cities also around Milan, like Pavia, Lodi, Treviglio, Vietegrasso, Bustarzizio, you find that you cannot access housing that are bigger than 50 square meters for sale in this case. But you also have to imagine that 50 square meters maybe is a common size for an apartment in Milan. But in these cities, in the majority of these cities, you don't have this kind of offer. You don't have this kind of supply. So even if you can dispose of the average income of these municipalities, you really struggle to access housing if you have only one income. Then we did the same exercise for renting, and the situation, seems to get better, because you see a lot of blue that was not present in the other map. But also you have to imagine that the rental market in these municipalities, and all of the municipalities that are actually blue in this map, is pretty zero. So you don't have rental offers. So where you have an indicator that gets better, you also have a lower supply of housing on the market. Then we started to try to answer the research question at the beginning. So if I have a job in Milan and I want to relocate outside of Milan, which kind of affordability conditions I can encounter? So here again, we did a little exercise. We added to the housing costs also the transport costs. In this case, only the public transport was like our focus here. But then we want also to add the value of time, because we think that it's really something that should be monetized. So we spoke a little bit with our colleagues that are more expert on transport planning, and so we understood that we could use this methodology of value of time to monetize really the time that you're spending while commuting. And so we did this kind of exercise, like, okay, how much, like if I want to access an apartment of 70 square meters, that is pretty like the average apartment outside of Milan, how much like would be the incidence on two different levels of salaries? So the one that Marco was saying before, like the level of salary of a lot of workers that has a gross salary of 1,500, and a second category of 2,800. And these are, sorry, like I have another map that's to explain you also a little bit like how we did it, like the time thing, because we wanted to also go to calculate which are the accessibility levels of this area. So here we can see actually why, I mean, also the commuting map was not relating so much with the rail transport, because again, the accessibility in the metropolitan area of Milan is much more based on cars, because in the yellow area are all the locations where you can reach Milan in 30 minutes by car. And this on a working hour, so from 7 to 9, this was our idea. And in green, you find all the locations where you can reach Milan with public transport. But actually, we can be also, I don't know, a bit some hope we can have, because we have some locations that are far away from Milan, like Pavia or Lodi, for example, where you can actually reach Milan in 30 minutes. So if we think about a better and improved railroad system, maybe we can also think about differently about the affordability of transportation. And these are the results of the exercise that we did. So the incidence for buying a house with a mortgage of 70 square meter with this level of salary, and would be pretty, I mean, all the salary. In the majority of the municipalities next to Milan, all the first belt, almost all the second belt, all the also accessible areas, because you see that, I mean, this geography of these scholars also follow the rail system. And you have maybe only one municipality here where you are in the 30-40% ratio with this salary. But again, you cannot maybe go, it's really far away. You have to do a lot of sacrifices, personal sacrifices to live there. Maybe, I mean, if you don't want to really live there, but it's your only possibility. This is for the higher level of salary, that the situation obviously improved a little, but not, I mean, but still it's pretty dramatic, the situation, because in all the first belt, you are above the 30%. So even if housing like really cost less, you still are spending a lot of money in transport. You really spend a lot of money and a lot of time to get to Milan. And so you see again here that maybe the best situation is between like, I don't know, 40%, 49%, because only in a location like maybe Vigevano, you are between 30 and 40. This was for sale, and this is the situation for renting. That actually improves a little again, but you have to imagine that you don't have such vivid like dynamic rental market outside of Milan, but the situation is pretty again difficult, because you are always above 50% in this case, and it approaches 60% in a lot of areas next to Milan, where the accessibility is higher. For renting again, we have a situation that improves a little bit, but the case is again that even if you want to rent a 70 square meter apartment, almost all your rent, a high percentage of your salary is absorbed by the cost. So it's really a situation where, I mean, you can pay less your house, but you are sacrificing a lot of time. you are paying a lot on transport, or you either have to buy a car, if you don't have it, and you really have to spend a lot also on the maintenance of a car. So yes, I will give the word to Mark again for a wrap up of this part.
Yes, and I don't know if then Massimo wants to also add something, but so basically, again, to bring our findings, which is really based on the work on the observatory, to the dimensions of housing inequalities. The question mark is then, okay, living outside Milan is a coping strategy, definitely is. We have evidence that people are actually doing it, are transferring their residence from Milan to any municipalities that we saw, or they don't come live in Milan even if they work or study there because they want to save some money or they can't even afford anything. So at what price living outside Milan? First issue, internal affordability level. So basically, people, the capacity of local people in municipalities outside Milan to afford a house is already critical in many cases. This is an effect, obviously, of low incomes, but also of the proximity to Milan, which inflates housing prices and real estate values, because definitely the proximity to Milan is one of the main drivers of real estate values, housing prices. And so thinking of moving the problem from Milan outside Milan actually means, in a way, also to increase the already existing housing issue in those municipalities that are there and that have, being smaller, they might also have much more impact on this transfer. Second was already addressed by Lorenzo. Living outside Milan is actually sometimes offering a better alternative, but at the cost of economic and personal sacrifices related to the fact that commuting in a city which has around 600,000 daily inward commuters means either getting very crowded trains that might be delayed or well, basically being stuck in traffic jams every morning and after. Finally, for a gross monthly salary of 1,500 euro gross per month, which is the typical salary of blue collars, representing 40% of workers or employees in the private sector, so a large, vast majority of people are actually carrying out the work that makes things work. Affordability conditions are critical even in the in the area outside Milan. So if you are a person living on your own with your own salary, so or a family living with one salary of this kind, you actually cannot even think of finding affordable housing conditions outside of Milan. With the exceptions of some very of some cheaper municipalities, but these are those who are not, which are not connected to even to public transport. So meaning that, as already mentioned, you have to own a car and become a car commuter. Okay, some final consideration. We have Milan with the housing crisis. We have the territory outside Milan kind of being part of this crisis and also leaving an impact from the Milan's housing crisis. We have an authority, which is a metropolitan city, that kind of could or should take care of this process, of these problems, but as an administrative body has been basically hollowed out, so has no instrumental competences or will, in a way, to handle this problem. One key difficulty that symbolizes this criticality is the fact that the mayor of the metropolitan city is automatically the mayor of the municipality of Milan. And you can really question whether one person, which is the mayor of one city, has any interest in dealing with some territory which is much more complex and bigger, or it will just end up doing nothing. Second issue regarding the impact of the Milan urban policies on the hinterland is that we have observed a centralization of attractive functions. Think of corporate offices, think of all these densification areas, think of all these new fancy housing neighborhoods, but also think about the stadium debate. You might as well be Milan or Inter fans, as many people are, and all of these functions are with a big effort being held within Milan. So by holding all these attractive functions within Milan, means basically inflating the pressure over Milan, but also means giving no chance to the rest of the territory to actually develop its own economy and societal improvement. The only decentralization that we have observed is the residential function. So basically you see a sectoralization of the territory, with Milan being attractive for jobs, leisure, commercial, and so on, and the rest of the territory only being for living and sometimes for buying grocery with the huge malls. This couples with the fact that there are 600,000 inward commuters every day to Milan. So of course there is a huge relation between those territories, but there is very segmented, very sectoralized. Attractiveness policies of Milan create a spillover effect on housing prices in the hinterland municipalities. We discussed this already. But, so this residential function that is kind of implicitly assigned to the hinterland is not coupled with an adequate investment into the public transport infrastructure. In fact, public transport quality decreases dramatically when you reach the borders of the administrative border of Milan municipality. And this is a big paradox, because if you want people to live outside Milan, there should be a good public infrastructure to actually allow this, as the relation between as all the attractive functions are being held within the city. B, meaning car-dependent commuting, meaning hundreds of thousands of cars entering Milan every day, which you might as well be experiencing. So a growing territory of polarization, so not only social and economic inequalities, but also territorial inequalities in this case. A few words about what we are doing, and then we can close. We are trying to step on from data analysis to qualitative analysis. So now we selected a few parts of this territory, of this huge territory. So imagine only dealing with 300 municipalities. It's impossible. We selected 5 cases that we are trying to analyze in depth by conducting field work and interviews with the key representative, in order to try to have a more fine-grained picture of the problem that we are looking at. I don't know if you want to add something. Otherwise, we can say that we have a website, that is this one. Our material is mainly in Italian. You can find a couple of articles in English as well, and also our report, which includes all the maps that you saw today and most of the figures, that is freely downloadable in the website. Thanks a lot.